Hello, I am Carissa, and this is my colleague Tosin, and we are going to be presenting on KQL and Azure AD workbooks for the Blue Team. And so I'm assuming that all of you guys are part of a Blue Team, but even if you're not, you might like this session. So, also, if you guys get hungry, since it's noon, feel free to go get something to eat and come back. Happy to do that. Also, everything that we're going to present today, all of the resources, everything, we're going to give you a GitHub repo, and everything will be in there. So if you miss something, don't worry. All right, let's get started. So I am Carissa Koopmans, and I am a product manager for Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft about 7 years, and I've been in the identity space for about 3 years. And as you know, identity has become very important, especially when it comes to cyber attacks. It is always the focus of bad actors. So hand in hand with security, and that's why we're here today. I'm going to introduce Tosin, but he's going to speak here in a little bit. Tosin is my colleague. He's also with Microsoft, and we work on a team together. It's called Get to Production, and that basically means that we sit in engineering, but we closely work with a lot of our enterprise customers, and we help them deploy Azure Active Directory, and we try to keep them as secure and safe as possible. All right, so today's session, our learning objective is really to share some threat hunting techniques and give you guys some extra tools that maybe you haven't used before. Maybe a raise of hands, does anybody use KQL today? Fabulous, okay, so I don't know what level everyone is at, but we're gonna just assume you guys have heard of it before, but I have provided a lot of extra resources if you are a very new beginner, but at least today you'll get to see like what you can do with it, and then you can go and either become more advanced or just get the lay of the land. So we're going to just walk through a quick overview of what workbooks are, some business cases that can really put it in perspective on how the Blue Team can use it, and then we are going to dive into some threat hunting with KQL and some tips and tricks that you can learn. And then I have a last section, which is really just an ask from you guys, because we would love your contribution. All right, so I'm assuming that probably everybody has heard the term zero trust and actually maybe even seen this slide before, but this is something we show a lot in our presentations at Microsoft, but it's supposed to be very product agnostic. Basically, every company needs to consider these pillars when they're considering securing their entire environment. So that includes identities, it includes data, applications, their infrastructure, and their network. So they have to consider, and endpoints. So they have to consider all of those things. And then across the bottom here is the visibility and analytics, where we're really diving in today. So there's tons of tools to use, and we know this, but in terms of visibility and analytics, we're going to show you what we can offer inside Azure Active Directory. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Tosin.
Okay. So, hello, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Like you said, my name is Tosin. I also work on the GCB team. I should really just introduce most of what I was about to kind of lead up with, so I'll just repeat it again. We work on a team that interacts with customers. My main job is to help deploy Azure AD features. And then to do this, one of the things I do is sit down and understand like use cases. So what exactly are you trying to solve? What problems do you have? How can the products we build help in your productivity and increase the experience you have using Azure AD as a feature, right? But we're mainly on the identity side of things. So users, devices, locations, policies, that's where we sit. That's where our mate is. But then there's this in-between part where it's like we're identity, but then we're also working with security. And so you would have a bunch of security questions that come our way, and this is where workbooks actually fall in, right? So one of the questions I get a lot is, there's so many portals now, we have so many data sources, we have so many reports, but then do I need to go into every single one, or is there like a way I can put together this unified visual and get insights on the data I have? And that's where workbooks come in. So generally, the way I explain workbooks is think about this like a collection of all your data sources and one report that gives you all that data. And so whether it's coming from the logs you've captured, whether it's coming from your custom endpoints for some external sources, or even just your Azure AD graph and graph resources, the workbook is your way of presenting that. Okay. Now, with Azure AD, you have some things, right? So with Azure AD, you get your overview, you get your logs. So you get the signing logs, you get the audit logs. We have conditional access. We have identity scores. And the way I explain identity scores is think about it like a benchmark. If you follow all the best practices, you can get 100%, for example. If you do some of it, you might be on 80%, 60%. And that way you get to see what the difference is, and you can actually feel those differentials and follow our recommendations to get up to par. Excuse me. But then if you go beyond just doing the basics, you get into what the middle part there, which I call the advanced capabilities, where then you can start to take some of these logs and then start to send them out to external resources, right? So if you process your data in Azure AD, you might be using log analytics. But then I have customers who say, yeah, that's nice, but then we do everything in Splunk. And so it's like, yeah, you can actually take that data as well, send it to Splunk, and you'll be fine as well. And then the next one or the next iteration to that is how do you take away the manual interaction, right? So how do you introduce some automation to things? And that's where you go into using your logic apps, and then that experience gets even better than it is right now. Excuse me. Now, getting data in. The first one is, excuse me, my voice, oh my God. Excuse me. Yeah, so getting data in, okay, that's better. Getting data in, the first one is log analytics, right? So how do you get the data to even show up in the workbooks? The first one is setting up your workspace. So if you go into diagnostic settings, well, before I even say that, is anyone familiar with the Azure AD portal here? Great, all right, good. So under monitoring, you have a bunch of things. You would have log analytics, you would have the workspace, and then diagnostic settings. If you go in there to the left, you have all the logs that are being captured, right? And then you can send them in. So at this point, you're building reports based off those logs that are being captured. So for the top one is when you want to do this using the Azure AD workbook. And then, like I said, it's not just Microsoft-centric. So if you were sending elsewhere, you want to go and also make sure you're streaming to Event Hub. And we'll talk about why that's important later on. But so much about workbooks. What do they look like? You have them in here. This is what the overview page looks like. On the top part there, you have new, which just indicates that you don't have to use some of these pre-canned workbooks we've made. You can actually go treat this like a canvas, start afresh, build everything you want. But then also in here, based off feedback we've gotten, based off situations that have happened in the past, we have some default reports that we advise customers to go look into. If you want to get started, go check this once. It would show you simple things that we think are important for customers to see. And then you can start to make customizations on those as you please. Now, you don't have to worry about the changes you make here affecting the global repository. That's not the way it works. You could make your customizations in here for your scenarios, and it just saves a different version for you. Contributions are welcome in here, and Carissa will talk about that in a bit. But then this is what you would see today if you went into the portal. So, business cases, right? So how do you even get started, or why do you want to use this? If you're security folks, you're probably thinking, well, you want to identify threats, you want to do it faster. Some things I've heard is, well, we know how to pull this data, but then we don't have a means of showing it to people who are not super technical, right? We need some visualizations that we could use. Workbooks come in really handy in here. We also want to, we want to be able to show what is normal and what's abnormal really quickly, right? So with a trend graph, you see what the baseline is, and one day you see a spike, it rings a bell in everyone's head, you understand what exactly you're looking for, and from there you just go on. So these are some common use cases, and I'll just briefly show some reports that we have that address a few of those. So really quickly, what happens when you're having multiple changes to a service principal and application, right? If you have more certificates being updated, if you have passwords being changed, just modifications like that, right? You want it to ring a bell, right? You want an alarm. You want someone to actually pay attention to this. Go investigate, make sure this is done correctly. And there's a report in there that is pre-canned that you can actually get started with. That's one example there. Another example is, what if you have service principals, and I think less freaky, but what if you have service principals, for instance, and then someday you start to see new permissions being added to them. The common ones we call out to customers would be the read and write permissions, because those are the most powerful ones. But then sometimes read all alone is worried or troublesome, right? And if you so I just have some examples in here. So things around Microsoft Graph, things around Exchange were another example, right? Where you want to pay attention to that, right? So you want to be able to go in there. In this example, I have a 7-day range. You can go as far as your data login mechanism goes. We advise to get richer reports that you store data for a little longer. And then you start to see, well, who made that change? So you have the initiating user or app name there, so you can actually verify. You have a little explanation of what that permission does, and then you get to see the roles that were added. Okay. Similarly, what if a service principal or application gets added to a role or a group? One day you wake up and somebody is now a global admin, or somebody is now a company admin. You want to be able to catch that real quick, because that might be a sign that something has gone wrong. And again, same logic. In this case, I use 60 days just to show what that range is. And then you can see what the operation is, as well as who did that. So let's move a little bit away from that, and let's think about like risk in this sense. So risk events, risky users. What you're looking at here is a map that shows you your risk detections, right? So what's a quick way to see where risky events are going on or where risky users are? This report will show you that right now. And the bigger circles just mean you have a high account, while the colors would indicate whether it's a high-risk event, medium-risk event, or low-risk event as well as a breakdown under there for the time frame. Now, we talked about what's normal and then finding anomalies, right? So the first thing that stands out to you looking at this report is the spike, right? So February 6th, you have a big spike, and it just kind of flattens out. That rings a bell to me, because I'm like, I wonder what happened that day. That's something I want to go investigate. But then also, we've gone further ahead to even break down what we think these risky events are by types. And so you start to see a large portion of that is new countries. So Tosin usually would sign in from the US, and then all of a sudden Tosin signing in from France. Like, well, it's something going on that my risk score probably goes up, and it's something to pay attention to. Or Microsoft has gone ahead and identified some IP addresses as malicious, and then you start to see login attempts from those in your tenants. So you want to pay attention to like very simple indications that there might be trouble. Moving really quickly, what about in situations where you collaborate, right? So you have your tenant speaking with users from another tenant. A lot of times you do that because you trust the other organization, but then do you want to know how many attempts are going in both ways? So from you to them, from them to you, do you want to have a good idea of like what applications are being used on the other end? And then do you want to know which of your users are doing that interaction as well? Reports like this would do the same thing, right? So you can go in, go by time frame, you could look up users, and you could look up specific applications if you're now worried about those, right? And then the last one from the pre-canned reports would be this one, right? So what about the gaps? What are the obvious gaps that you might be missing in your environment right now? Do you have applications that don't have any policies around them? Again, we're from identity, right? So I talk conditional access, I talk identity protection. And so it's like, you have this high impact application, but then there's no policy guiding it for some reason. You want to be able to catch that real quick. Now that might have been missed, but then your workbook shows you, and it's something you can actually go back and try to remediate real quickly. Another one is, do you have locations where you have no conditional access policy blocking? And that's what you see on the map to the left as well. So this one, really obvious, legacy authentication. We talk about this quite a bit because most of what we do at this point, we're preaching MFA, make sure that's at least, that's the basic at this point, right? So that's the baseline. We require most applications to have MFA if they can. The only reason why you probably would not be able to prompt that now would be legacy auth. And as much as we're trying to phase that out, there's actually a deprecation in October, I believe, for legacy auth. But for now, we give a way for admins to identify that really quickly. So just run the reports. You can see interactive sign-ins and non-interactive sign-ins. And then you can start to look at which ones, which applications people are still signing to using legacy auth. And then you can gradually start to cut that down. Or even users, right? So which users are still using it, and then you gradually take those down. So these are like a couple of reports that we have, right? Like I said, you have a bunch of them in there, multiple categories you can go in and play with. The idea is this is the visualization, right? So what's running behind this is KQL, right? So that's how this is all built. And that's what Carissa will spend some time now showing you some of the code and some of the ways to manipulate that. So you can take what we've built as the starter packages and then start to make changes and come up with creative ways that actually solve your own issues. And hopefully you can also contribute to the community and we get this going even bigger and bigger. So at this point, I'll hand over to Carissa and she'll get into the code. Thank you.
All right, are you guys ready for now, like, seeing the nitty gritty? All right, so I'm gonna go in. Basically, everything that was in this workbook is built on KQL that looks similar to this, right? And it is a very small screen, so I'm gonna try to zoom in if I can. There we go. I don't know if that helps. Can you guys see it in the back? Okay. Perfect. So I have slides that are gonna really go through the code, but I'm gonna highlight something else before we get into that. So as I mentioned, everything is built on this KQL, and in Log Analytics, no matter what you put in here, you can create a new alert based on this, right? On that code very easily. And it's basically just this button here, new alert. So the idea is that in this situation, we were saying, okay, how can we know that our administrators are going through MFA? Are there any administrators that are failing MFA? And that's something we want to alert on. We want our security team to investigate these things immediately. So in this instance, that's what that code is doing. I will walk it through when we go into the other slide that's a little bit more clear. But you can see the results that, like, the global administrator had, 330 failed attempts in 24 hours. To me, that would be concerning, especially if I knew that in my environment I only had, 7 global administrators. However, there could be cases where these companies are huge, right? So this is something that you need to cater towards your environment. It can't be something that is all the same. So I'm actually gonna go into the portal just because I like to. So 1 second. Makes it much easier for me to show you. All right. Oh yeah, I'm not sharing it. Darn it, okay. I don't want to change it, I'll go back. Okay. I can't see my arrow, so I have to. There we go. Okay, I'm back. All right. I'm gonna make this bigger so I can see. Okay, so luckily I took screenshots because then I wouldn't be able to explain to you. So this is just a view of the actual KQL. I had just clicked the button New Alert, and then it brings up this page. And so what this page is going to allow me to do is to really specify the type of alerts I want to set up. So you have this KQL, which is finding, it's identifying where any global administrator is hitting MFA and failing, having a result of fail, and then counting it. So there's a few different ways I can aggregate the count of the information that I want to track. And in this sense, I can look at the table of rows, or I can look at the count. But I'm deciding that I want to just see how many rows of information or how many fails I have every 5 minutes. That's my aggregation granularity. And then go on to the next slide. I also can decide my alert logic. And this is going to say, okay, it's greater than, say, 20. Like if I have 20 failed MFAs in 5 minutes, I should be very concerned. Or maybe someone will want to see it if it's 3 or 4. You can decide that. You can set up your security policies that way. It also will tell you how much, alerts, how much this is going to cost, which is, it's not really pertaining, to everyone, but if you're using Azure Active Directory, and if you have customers that are using Office 365, they already have Azure AD. So in this sense, this is something that you can do really specifically for your Office 365, if nothing else. I mean, you can bring all your enterprise apps into this, but just know that if you have somebody who has Office 365 in their environment, these are tools that you can help to keep them safe. All right, so I did an aggregation granularity of 5 minutes, and then the frequency of evaluation has to be that or less than, or sorry, that or greater than. And so in this sense, I'm just saying that I want to check, I want to check the count every 5 minutes and then send an alert if it's over 20. And then I can also name this alert rule, and I can change the severity, which is great. And then here is where we're gonna go into the KQL of actually what's being said. So in this sense, I just, I'm calling this as administrators fail MFA code. And this is where you may have, a lot of you have already used KQL, and so you may know this already. But I kind of want to just tell you the main things that have helped me to create these workbooks, that has helped me to become better at this, and also do some cool stuff. So I always use the let function, the where function, the MV expand. So that's why I like this query, because it shows you a lot of those. For example, the identity information is where we're going to see the role information. So we're going to be combining 2 different data sets entirely. We're getting log information from identity info, and then we're also getting log information from sign-in logs. And actually, I lied. There's a third from AAD non-interactive user sign-in. So those are going to be our service principal sign-ins. All right, so we start up here, and we're really just saying we're gonna create kind of this variable, this table, that's gonna be table name string, so that whatever we create later on, it can be applied to whatever table we have created. And this is gonna be later on in the query. And it's basically gonna say, okay, we're gonna have identity information where, and this assigned roles part is a column in the log data. And we're only gonna look, and we only care about that contains admin. So there's many, many roles, right? There's many roles that you can be, but we care about the administrator roles. And in the MV expand has a couple different things that I think are super useful. So when you're creating new columns, sometimes you need to change the data a little bit. Also, there's also gonna be times where maybe the data is also in a dynamic JSON format. And that's a way for us to save our customers money, because having all this data, we can't create a separate column that takes up more space. So sometimes we put it all into one in JSON format. And so you might need to parse it out, but I'm gonna show you that later. But in this instance of MV expand, we're looking at assigned roles, and then we're taking and we're gonna make new columns out of it. We're gonna extend the roles to, we're gonna make a column called roles, and that's going to contain the string version of assigned roles. And then we're going to also take the account UPN and we're going to lowercase it. And this is the reason that we have to do this line, is because we are planning to merge and to unite and do a join. So in this sense, we say, okay, where the roles contain admin, and then we're just looking at distinct. I don't want to know every single one. I just want to know the distinct roles and account UPN, so that I'm tracking, I'm not double counting, right? And then we're doing a join. And if you guys are familiar with SQL at all, this is going to seem very familiar. A lot of the times it's KQL is very similar to SQL, but there's these slight nuances. So inside our documentation, and I'll share this with you, they have a lot of SQL to KQL, I call it KQL, it's not that. SQL to KQL translation, and also I think there's KQL to, there's a few other languages that we have it transferred to, as well as like how you use it in Splunk. So I'll definitely link to those. Oop. All right. Okay, so in this instance, now we're doing a join, and we're bringing in where the result description, this is where we're deciding what type of authentication method, what type of MFA did they do. So we're only gonna care about MFA, second factor, multi-factor, and then we're looking at these result types. And these result types we know, and I know, but you guys don't if you're not familiar with these logs, that these are all failed attempts. So we're just listing the different types of results. And then we're doing a join, and then we're going to create a couple new columns again. And in the bottom part, we're kind of referring back up to this add func to the table, and we're saying, okay, we want to do this for sign-in logs, and we're also gonna do it for Azure AD non-interactive sign-in logs. And once we join those and bring those together, we're able to have this great column that is going to combine this sign-in information with the role information. And then we're going to summarize it. And we're summarizing at the end, like every query, in order to have this result, needs some type of scalar function like summarize. And you'll use summarize all of the time. So definitely like project and summarize are also very, very common to use. So project can also be a function, and it can kind of serve as summarize sometimes, but it's also a way to break down your query and like say, I have all this data, but I'm only gonna focus on like 5 to 6 roles. That's what the project can do. It can take away some stuff which makes the KQL lighter, and it's going to process faster. And okay, so we're summarizing the count of failed attempts by roles, and then we are gonna do an order by, which is very similar. So this is exactly, an example. It's just one example of things you can do to set an alert for. And then, in terms of automation, like what Tosin was talking about, you could say, okay, set an alert and also send this to ServiceNow. Create a ticket, have somebody look into it. These are the idea. Like we want you to, be able to start to find and track these things. And we know not everything is going to be an actual attack, but it could be something that needs additional investigation. And if we can automate some of this, that's the dream, right? We don't want to have to do this manually. All right. Are any of you falling asleep? Not yet. Okay. Okay, that's fine. If you're hungry, like I said, go get food. All right, so we're going to get into some tips and tricks. And this is just to help you not bang your head against the table like I did numerous times when I was learning. And I'm assuming that all of you guys are way smarter than me, and you probably already know way more advanced coding than this. But then I'm going to decide that that's okay. I'm going to still explain it, and if you get nothing out of it, I'm sorry, but I hope you get at least something out of it. So laying out a workbook or laying out something that I know, I should ask, do you guys ever have to create reports to show your leadership at all on the stuff that you're doing and protecting your environment from? Okay, good. That makes me happy. So then this could become useful to you. We want these visualizations to be not necessarily easy for you to understand, but easy for your manager and your leadership to understand and to explain. So when I lay out a workbook, I am not trying to go crazy and create the newest, coolest workbook. I don't care. And actually mine are sometimes very, very basic is not the word I like to use, but that's what it is. Okay, so in terms of how I like to lay it out, I'm always gonna put a donut chart and I'm gonna put a timeline chart. And I'm gonna show this information side by side. And I'm gonna do that for every single way that I'm gonna break out this data. And in the end, if I have, and the reason I do this is because there are 29 workbooks alone that we have in our arsenal, and that's just the stuff that is like templated. So if I am constantly seeing different visualizations and different ways to look at things, my eye isn't going to catch anomalies as quickly. But if I'm used to the way that I'm looking at data, I'm gonna probably catch things that look a little weird. All right, so here's an example of laying out the workbook, but as one of my customers said to me, he's like, I don't want to see the same data. Like, I don't want to see it as counts in both of them. I want to see percentages over here in the donut chart. And one amazing thing about workbooks, and it's not actually amazing, but it's just the way that it works, is that if you try to just like how you would think to do it, go into like chart settings and change it to percentage, it doesn't work. It's going to be like 2,908%. So it doesn't actually calculate the percent for you. So that is where you guys have to actually create it in the query itself. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So how do we convert all of this information to percentages that are actually useful? All right, this looks way harder than it is. It's a lot of words, yeah. So the query itself is in the black and blue and red, and then I tried to put in in the green, I tried to put in the explanation of each line, just to try to make it a little bit more consumable. So in my mind, it's a good idea to always start thinking of like, what is your base query in your workbook? Because your workbook most likely is going to have a query that's pretty consistent throughout the workbook. And so this is my base query that I built out for when I was building a authentication method analysis workbook, because we were trying to figure out who's getting over-prompted in their environment. And so, okay, this is my base query that's pretty much gonna be consistent through all my visuals. Let's start at the beginning, because it might be helpful. All right, sign-in logs. This is gonna be, sign-in logs is so much information in there. And people can say, yes, I can just look at the raw data. I don't know if they can actually look at the raw data and get too much out of it. So this is a way to like really parse it out, make something of it. And this is just one option. So we're gonna do an MV expand right away, because a lot of the important data are in these dynamic columns. Or they're dynamic columns that have also been made into strings, which make them even more complicated to pull out. So in this instance, I really want to pull out information from authentication details, because like I told you, I'm building this workbook that is for authentication methods, so I need something out of there. And if I had access to my portal, I could show you what that data looked like. Just trust me, it's in JSON, okay? And all right, so we're gonna expand that field out, and I'm gonna call it parse fields, and I'm gonna do a parse underscore JSON. This parse underscore JSON can also be parse underscore CSV. So depending on, how the format of that column is, you have options to parse it out. So I'm parsing out the authentication details column. And then I'm gonna make a new column, because I'm gonna take that data that I just grabbed and I'm gonna create the authentication method column, but I still have to call back to the parsed information. And then I do a parsed fields dot authentication method. That means inside the JSON format in a key value pair, the authentication method was the the label, and then I'm gonna pull out each of those values. So that's all that's doing. Then it tells me it doesn't like that the way that it is, and I need to make it into a string as well. And so you don't always have to do this step, and you may not have to do any of these steps, but just depending on the column and the way it's put together. In this instance, I did an auth method, and I put it back into a string, and I pulled that information to make it a string, and I gave it a new label. All right. Then I basically did the same thing for device detail, because I wanted to put in, information about not just authentication method. I want to see authentication method by the devices that I have. I want to see it by the operating system that it's coming from. I want to see it by user, by application. I want it broken down in every which way. And so in this sense, I'm like building all of these columns because I'm preparing my base query. So I'm doing the same thing I just explained to you, but for different columns. And all these extend is basically saying, give me this new column. All right. So then we get into the where clauses, like the where statements. And this is where I'm going to put in my barriers of the type of data I want. And in this instance, I'm going to say, I don't want to count previously satisfied. Okay, so I say where auth method does not equal previously satisfied, or it doesn't equal blank. I want all that information out of my data set. And this is gonna be consistent throughout my whole entire workbook. So it's important that I know what each step is doing. And that when I also send this data to someone, or if I explain this data to someone, I let them know the data that I took out and how I'm calculating it. Because otherwise they're gonna be expecting to see a lot more sign-ins, and I just removed every single one that was previously satisfied, which is probably 90% of the authentication sign-ins. All right. So now we go in and we're doing, okay, where our username is, we take out some users that we don't care about, and then we set some filters. So everything from here, this where authmed, in authmed, or asterisk, all of these things here, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I can't count, but 5 or 6 in there, that all pertains to the parameters that I set at the beginning of the workbook, which are filters. So when I first started building out these workbooks, I had no idea what that code meant or like what it pertained to, but it's all relating back to a perimeter. So if I set a perimeter, set a filter up in my workbook to say, hey, I want to be able to filter by this username, the only way that the visual has any idea to listen to that filter is by putting it in your query. All right, so that's what all those are. And then I did another new column for status because someone decided after I'd kind of built out this query that they also wanted to see failures or successes. And so that's why it's at the bottom, because I added it later. In this instance, it doesn't impact my data in a negative way, but you do sometimes need to be cautious of the order. In this instance, it didn't matter, but do know that sometimes in KQL, it does matter of what order you're putting these lines. All right, now we have, that's the last one. Okay, now at the end, we're doing our summary. So we're saying we're gonna summarize the count by auth method. All right, great, we have the summary, but we still don't have percentage. So great that we have this base query. Now what do we do to get it to be a percentage? All right, so this is where you're gonna create a new variable, and it's gonna be called, hey, base query. That sounds easy. And we're gonna materialize it. And it creates, basically the materialize function creates a subquery that other queries can reference later. So that's what that is, all that's doing. And it's materializing the base query that I just walked you through. So this should all look familiar. The only thing that's different here is I took out the summarize because we're not going to summarize it like we did on just count. And if you guys want to ask questions like during this, if I'm going too fast, just raise your hand and Tosin will catch it. Because I can go over anything in more detail. It's totally your guys' discretion. All right, so I'm gonna close that loop of materialize, and then I'm gonna create the total count variable. And I have to do a toScaler function here because it's gonna return a constant value. And this is super important for when I'm calculating percentages, because if it's not gonna be a constant value, there's gonna be slight differences in the number depending on when I ran it. So you gotta think about that as well. All right, so then we're saying the total count is that, all right, great, just the base query count, that's all it is. And then we're going to reference base query, because remember I told you the reason we're building this up here is because we wanna reference it later. And so we're gonna reference base query, and then we're gonna do our summarize of the auth methods, and we're going to, in this instance, take it times 100 and divide it by the total count by auth method. This is actually gonna aggregate the count and divide by total count, that fixed count method, and that's actually gonna give us correct percentages. Truth be told, there's been times where I haven't had to take it times 100 or I've maybe had to do slightly different. So do look at the numbers, see if it actually makes sense. Because sometimes it can be a little wonky, but normally it's just like basic math. Take a look, does that make sense? Okay, maybe tweak it a little bit, but overall it's a percentage function. All right, so that's that tip. I have 16 more minutes to tell you more tips, or you can ask questions. Does anybody have a question? Okay, no. Okay, yes.
So, I mean, you obviously put a lot of work into this, and then does Microsoft work with customers to help create these? Like,
yes.
Basis,
yes.
Or like, they spend $N million a year?
Well, exactly. So if you spend N dollars a year, a lot of millions of dollars, you probably get someone like Tosin or I to help you and to do workshops and to sit with your identity and security team and say, let me walk you through all of these. But as we mentioned before, like there's a ton of already these templates that are built that we give them. And that's what this is for. Those templates are to say, yeah, we get this is probably not everybody's jam to do KQL, so we're gonna do it for you. And hopefully they're useful, but a lot of times they need to be customized. So getting people to care about KQL is kind of like maybe what they used to do about PowerShell. Like, yes, care about it. And now everybody knows it, right? And we're assuming that maybe eventually, well, I don't either, but someone on the team I know does, and I can always go ask that person. So that's where we're getting. That's why we're even here to like let you know it's available. Yeah?
I just have two quick questions.
Sure.
On a few slides back.
Yep.
When you were talking about the threat, yeah, one more back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You were saying that in your results that some might be actual threats and some might just be something that you should look at. In your query, can you add in like the differences or just give you all in one class?
So I can basically do whatever is in the logs. And so in this instance, there's nothing calling out, hey, this is a flag or something like that. But we have a different data set it's all based on risk and risk detections. And so in that one, yes, I could. Because the data actually in the logs is calling out high risk versus low risk. So I could tag those. But in this one, I'm basically creating alert. And the best I can do is create the data set that actually could be a scenario that seems risky, right? Or seems like something's not right, and then I'm gonna have to investigate it. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's also like left to your interpretation, right? So even when we say this is high risk, it's left to your interpretation of,
Yeah.
well, is this high risk for your organization? So
Right.
we look at like the collective data and to say, yeah, this looks suspicious, but then you might just look, and we'll give those options to say, well, this is not a problem, just ignore it.
Yeah.
So, and then how customizable can you really go with it? I guess, like, so I know that you said that there's a lot of like presets and then you can customize it
Yep.
from there, but
As long as whatever you learn to do with KQL, it can be as customized as you wish. Like you can, as long as you can pull the data in there, it's up to you. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on intelligently squelching alerts so that the analysts don't get overwhelmed?
You know what? That would be what I'm going to ask you at the end is the community contribution. Tell us what you want to have. Tell us what you need. Or, if you want to take a stab at creating it in a different language and you want us to try to translate it into KQL so it's also, like, we're up for anything. So anything that can help analysts, because I've learned that at SANS, I took a course and I think this is the only thing I actually remembered, was that the most important time and the most valuable thing is your analyst time, right? So, yep.
So I know you can define like high-risk activity.
Yeah.
There's a pre-can, high-risk login or something like that. Can you define those high risks? Can I define those high risks? No.
You can define them in the sense that you can set alerts on what you define as high risk, but in terms of what's actually labeled in the sign-in logs, that is determined by machine learning and the stuff that Microsoft has gathered, right? From billions and billions of logins, like this is what we think. Unfortunately, some people have much, stricter guidelines, and so our medium risk might be your high risk. And those are the things that I think we constantly get feedback from our customers about that, and we're trying to also make that something that can be more customizable. But right now it's just set by how Microsoft.
If I want to define my own high risk, I have to start.
You'd probably need to create an alert and say and mark it as a high alert. Mark it as high risk.
Right.
Yeah.
But I have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
To do my own.
Or technically, you wouldn't have to start from scratch. You could take a query that's already built in and then just make small changes and set it as an alert. So that's also like, you never really, like honestly, even I don't necessarily start from scratch. Sometimes I just take a piece that I know I'm gonna need and build on it, yeah.
So then, how, so you guys have you use the ATA, I don't know what it's.
Like threat protection, or is it like threat analytics or something? Is that what you're saying?
Your UVA product,
Oh, okay, I don't know, UV, I don't know.
the user behavior analysis.
Oh, okay, yes,
Yeah, so on-prem you had something called ATA.
okay,
I forget what it's called when it comes to
yep.
the cloud.
I think is it Sentinel or ATP? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it possible to pull that data into this query?
To pull Sentinel data here, or the UBA data? No, I know, I'm just trying to think, because normally what we would say is like, this is the intermediate step before you would get your data in Sentinel. So a lot of times we're pulling this data into Sentinel or into a SIEM solution where you can also do the UBA stuff.
So
Yes.
put this into Sentinel.
Yes.
And you would use Sentinel to do the correlation.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, I don't care, to her question before, this would be like, okay, now I can actually merge.
Yeah.
This is risky behavior because I see,
Yep. Yes.
this alert. Or this high alert, I know it's not, I don't care about because I'm correlated.
Exactly. Like, we are definitely not trying to take place of a SIEM solution here. It's really just quick analysis, because I do feel like there's sometimes separation of duties, right? People who completely are trying to do these like attack threats and analysis versus who has access to the SIEM solution, so it's a way to kind of do some quick and dirty work in the middle. Yeah. Okay, yes. Any other questions before?
Question.
Yeah.
So it seems like this, and I guess any other workbooks similar to it would be more for like a SOC analyst and not for the blue team. Do you agree with that?
So if you, as a blue team, do not need to automate anything, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think what we're trying to say is that if you are blue team and you are looking for anomalies, you're looking for ways to do querying lots of log data, because do you guys look at log data as blue team?
Sure.
Yeah. So then this is a way to like query that log data and make sense of it in an easier way. Yeah. And also you wouldn't even have to do this in workbook. So there's also something, and I don't know what I forget always the name of it, but it's called Kusto Explorer, where you're bringing in, where it's just more of a platform to do huge queries. It's not trying to do all the beautiful visualizations for you, which may be more in your neighborhood of what you would like to see. Maybe, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. All right. How much time? Okay, 8 minutes. Well, I'm gonna keep on going, but if you have questions, just raise your hand. All right, so we covered that already. All right, the other cool thing that I like to point out, and that was very tricky for me, was making these graphs interactive. So I may want to, like, this looks great and all, but I may want to like click into Authenticator app and see the data move, right? That's usually what probably right away someone's going to do, is like try to like punch on the donut chart and see things move. And so they expect that. So the way that you create these interactive graphs is, for example, you just open up your advanced settings in the workbook, and every single visualization that you're creating, every single query that you're creating is going to have these options above it. And you're going to say, when certain items are selected on this graph, I want to pull out some parameters. That's basically what this is doing. And so in this sense, I'm going to say, I'm going to export parameters, and I'm going to call it selected auth method. I made that name up. I just put it in there. That's my name for it. However, this default series, that's important. That's saying that if it's not going to be clicked on, what do you want me to show? And I want you to show all of the data. That's basically what this is saying. So if I want the pie chart and or the donut chart and the line graph to be interactive, this is what I have to do to the pie chart. And then I have to add KQL to this interactive, to the graph that is going to show the results based on what I selected. And what you're gonna add, the query that you're gonna add is this new MV expand, which is building out, it's going to do some parsing for you. So I'm doing a parse method, I'm parsing the JSON, and I'm putting it all into a string in one line. And this is, if you remember, is this parameter name I made up. So it's basically creating this column for me. And I'm going to call it I'm going to call it selected auth method, that column. And it's basically going to take this information that I put into the parsed method variable and pull out just the series information. The series is the values and labels that I want. And this, where selected auth method is all, it's either going to be that or it's going to be whatever I selected. So in the end, this code I inserted into my base query that we've all went through. And then now, when I select on, say, Authenticator app, this is going to show up, that's really small. Yeah. Then that's going to show up just with the auth method information. And just so you can see what actually happened when I entered that KQL, it built this column right? It built the selected auth method column and added it to the data set. And so whenever I select something, this gets adjusted. In this example, I selected the mobile app notification value. And so now it only shows that information and counts it out. They're clapping. I hope you guys do that for us. All right. Last thing, because I feel like we kind of did questions throughout the thing, so I don't. Huh?
Just in case you want to use some more room.
For questions?
Yeah, if they have one.
Well, I'm just letting you guys. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes.
Oh, we can go back.
Sorry? Oh, I think he was just telling me I had 5 minutes, I think, yeah.
Do you happen to have a image with like the full dashboard?
Yeah.
When you first log in, maybe?
Yes. Now let me see. Oh, you guys can see my dashboard. What? How did it not do that before? Oh, I could have been doing this the whole time. Okay, anyways. All right, so I'm gonna show you what I just talked about really quick in this last few minutes. What? All right, so basically I'm in the Azure Active Directory portal. Are you familiar with the portal at all, the Azure Active Directory portal whatsoever? Okay. Okay, so I am in this monitoring section. Here, I'm scared to click on anything because it might take time to load, but let me go, oh, maybe not. This is how the workbooks look like when I'm editing them, just FYI. So like I'm editing the query here. I can also bring it into Log Analytics, which is better, but I'm gonna just quick go to the workbooks blade and see if it is friendly with me today.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to
Yep.
how that looks.
Yeah. Oops. What now? Yeah. If it doesn't load up, I will share it. All right, this is what, all these purple ones are what we have created as templates, and so I get a lot of my KQL from ones that are already pre-made and then customize it. And then these ones that are saying recently modified, in terms of my team, this is the ones that we've created. Like I have a B-Sides Charm one. So I've created it and saved it, and then it shows up to me because I have access to this specific Azure subscription. So not everybody's in your company is going to have access to this. I have to be able to have access to use this Azure subscription. Is that kind of what you wanted to see, or? Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. Are there any other questions? Like, I guess, oh, this is where I can show you what the data looks like before you parse it out. This is really what I wanted to show you. So this is how authentication details is all put into one column, and it's in JSON, but it's also then in brackets, which requires an extra step to pull it out and to parse it. It is annoying. And you know, honestly, like even when I explain it, it sounds silly, but that's what it is. And I think they must put it into a string to also just save space and time, I don't know. But anyways, there's a lot of information there that you wouldn't know unless you go and look at it and pull it out. So a lot of good stuff are in those dynamic fields. Okay, I have like 1 minute and 50 seconds left, so any other questions? I will, oh, yes.
Comment, if anyone's not familiar, using new functions and things like Azure Data Explorer, so you can basically build an entire query, and then all you need to do to use it again is just write and trigger the function in your
Awesome. Azure Data Explorer is the word I was looking for Kusto Explorer. So thank you. Because Kusto Explorer is like internal, Azure Data Explorer is what it is for you guys. The other thing, which is really cool, and I will put this in our resources, but if you go to aka.ms LA demos, what? Oh, LA demo, long O, just kidding, just one O. You can just play around. It's basically a portal and Azure AD space for you just to play around and experiment with. It's not attached to any subscription or anything. It's just a demo environment, so you guys can play around with all of these different types of logs. They'll just be sample data. So, yeah. Now you guys can clap for us. I'm just kidding. Yay! We finished. With 4 seconds. Oh, yeah. He just remembered. I guess we're not done. Last thing. If you guys want, and if you can, your contribution would like really help to the community. It's just like an open source community, and I know I'm showing you slides in this way, but you'll get over it very quickly. So the Azure AD Workbooks GitHub is something that anybody can join, and then you can submit your ideas. You can create your own workbook and submit it, and it could be even turned into one of the templates. You can provide feedback and like say, hey, this is wrong, or this is way outdated. Like, you guys need to update this. Or you can also share your tips and tricks, like what you just said. Like, I mean, you obviously know KQL very well, so please, like, tell us all those tips and tricks. And then in this aka.ms KQL Blue Team, that's going to take you to the repository where we're going to put these slides. We're also putting a ton of resources that are really good. We also recommend a few different KQL tutorials that are done in Pluralsight. So it'll be a lot of stuff there for you. And yeah, thank you for coming to our little session. And have a great rest of your B-sides.